Well, we are at our 53rd meeting of the BWS Stakeholder Advisory Group. Welcome a couple new members. Kaleo, welcome. A couple words you want to say?
No, just Kaleo, Managing Director of Water Resources at KS under our newly kind of created Aina Pauahi group. So some of you are probably familiar with Kaleo Duarte, so he's our Vice President of Aina Pauahi. So yeah, 11 months on the job, so don't ask me hard KS questions, but here and happy to help and be a part of this group.
Awesome, welcome. And Ryan, welcome.
Hi, yes, I'm Ryan Obrero with the Honolulu Board of Realtors. I'm the Chief Financial Officer of the Board of Realtors, and I'm replacing Suzanne Young. She used to sit in my place, and so I'll be going into these meetings going forward, but thank you everyone for having me, and I look forward to discussing with you all these issues that we face.
All right, thank you very much and welcome. So our plan for tonight, we just took care of the first part, welcome. We'll have opportunity for public comment. Gonna talk about the landfill. Then we're gonna talk about climate change and how we're evaluating climate change impacts and applying those to the Water Master Plan. And then we'll have the opportunity for Red Hill updates, of course, accepting our notes from the last meeting, and then wrap up. Opportunity for public comment on any items on the agenda. Looking around, I don't see any. Great. With that, Ernie, you're up.
Well, mahalo and Happy New Year, everybody. It's 2025, and thank you for staying with us all these years. Welcome to the new members of our Stakeholder Advisory Group. You know, I thought I've been now manager for 12 plus years, and in about a month it'll be 13 years as a manager if I'm still on the job. But as some of you have been with me since the very beginning, and I really appreciate that. And I also welcome the new members to the Stakeholder Advisory Group. You play a very important role in helping to guide the path forward for Honolulu Board of Water Supply, and also for our island's water resources and our future. So you play a very important role. I'm going to just give a brief update here. Kawai Ola, you all know that Water for Life, that's our vision for the BWS. Our mission is to provide safe, dependable, and affordable water now and into the future for our community. And you've seen this before for some of the new members of our SAG. This is a kind of infographic showing our water system from the water sources that come from right now 100 for domestic water, drinking water. We're 100% dependent on underground aquifers, either at fresh water floating on seawater, or dike impounded, or water at high elevations up in the mountains where our tunnel sources tap those water sources. So it's all groundwater for our domestic drinking water needs. And we have to produce about 145 million gallons a day to meet the needs of about 1 million people that we serve on this island, including our visitors. It takes a lot of infrastructure to get that water to where our customers need that water. Residential, commercial, industrial customers, government customers, and that takes about 2,100 miles of water pipes in the roadways. So I'll talk about the city's request for our position on a new proposed municipal solid waste landfill. And also this landfill, I think, is proposed to also take something else called construction and demolition waste. Because the island's only landfill will close in the near future. That's PVT landfill over in the Nanakuli area. And after that, the construction and demolition waste will actually go to this new proposed landfill, along with what they call municipal waste, the opala that we all generate in our lives and businesses. So back in November of 2022, Dr. Roger Babcock, the director of the Department of Environmental Services, wrote us a letter and asked our input on 6 proposed sites. So some of the members here, like Cynthia, served on the Landfill Advisory Committee, LAC, back about 2 years ago. And they sent the sites that met all the state and state requirements for a landfill and city requirements, and except for the Board of Water Supplies no pass area. They basically came out with 6 sites that are all were proposed to be over our drinking water water resources, our groundwater aquifers that can or are being used as sources of drinking water and domestic water for our community. So we responded also in November of 2022 and basically disapproved all 6 sites. And the primary reason is the location. Location of these landfills, these sites, directly above water resources that are important freshwater resources for our community today and into the future. As rainwater seeps through the landfill, that rainwater as it passes seeps through the opala, the tons and tons of opala, it picks up contaminants, different chemicals, including PFAS chemicals and other things. And that contaminant-laden water is called leachate. And they collect that leachate. They have a containment system, a liner under the landfill to capture that. And they actually pump that out and take it to a wastewater treatment plant and dispose of it at a wastewater treatment plant. But our concern is that this leachate volume can actually leak out of the landfill. There could be a severe rainfall event that washes out a portion of the landfill that will put the opala out in the environment. Our concern is its impact on groundwater below and nearby the facility. Keep in mind, in 2022, they came to us with 6 sites. They did not select one site out of the 6. They asked for our feedback, and we basically said, these sites are not acceptable because of their location above freshwater resources. They made a press conference in December 10th of 2024, and that's where they announced a selected site. And it happened to be at that press conference, that's the first time I actually saw the site at that press conference that the mayor conducted. And I looked at it and I was wondering, that looks like maybe one of the 6 sites that we looked at back in 2022. And later on I confirmed that indeed that was one of the 6 sites that we had already expressed our disapproval. So on December 17th of last month, I sent a letter to Environmental Services basically reaffirming the disapproval of that site, which was one of the 6 sites that we had disapproved 2 years prior. That triggered in our administrative rules because some of our authority on issues of waste disposal systems is embodied in our Board of Water Supply rules and regulations. And landfills are explicitly listed, a part of that list of waste disposal systems that anybody who wants to install something would have to approach the manager and chief engineer to see if it's okay. The manager and chief engineer would evaluate it based on primarily its impact to freshwater resources that we depend on currently or in the future. So that triggered the 30-day clock. Today is the last day for E&V to actually ask for an appeal or reconsideration of my disapproval that was issued on December 17th. I'll just say that just coming before this meeting, I haven't received any email communication or letter from E&V yet, but there's still 8 more hours to go before the day is over. So they got to midnight. So we'll see what happens if they actually indeed petition for reconsideration. If they do submit a petition to reconsider my position, my original position, then I'm required under our rules to conduct a hearing to allow them to be able to present additional technical information and do a presentation to try to provide information to change my mind, basically, and that they would do that. And that hearing that we're looking at the details, the administrative rules are not explicit on how that hearing is conducted. But when I think hearing, I think of a public setting that allows not only the applicant to present information, but it's an opportunity, I think, very important to allow the community to weigh in on their their opinions about a proposed landfill, for or against the landfill. So that's the next step. If I, after conducting the hearing, issue either uphold my original position of disapproval or change it to an approval with conditions or without conditions, I have to issue that. And after that, the Environmental Services has another 30 days to actually then appeal the decision of the manager to the water board, to our board of directors. And then ultimately, our board of directors will have the final say on the position of the Board of Water Supply on a new proposed landfill above a freshwater resource. So that's how it might play out. Is there any questions from any of you out here? We're kind of in new territory, at least in my memory. Bob?
Sounds like a really good process, a lot of opportunity for input. And your opinion stands strong. I mean, if anybody on this island knows what happens when pollutants get over a water table, you articulate that risk very well. What I would like to do is make sure that the general public can articulate the risks equally well. What about liability now or 100 years from now? Do the taxpayers get stuck with any problems that might come? What are the assumptions that are being made that might be questioned? If he says no leak, how are they going to prove that? And what is the relative efficacy of the metrics tied to that? Is it just going to be a spot check, a periodic check? I'm looking for soft spots so we can poke at it. Roger, it's hard to go up against a guy who's a professor, a PhD, smart guy, respected, and when he says something, if you say, gee, I don't think so, a man on the street, that's not good enough. You got to have credentialed people with really good arguments. You can do that, but it would be nice if there was a way to school the general public in how to poke holes or into the soft spots on this proposal. Anyway, I can jabber on for a long time. That's enough.
Last night I attended a public meeting conducted by Councilmember Matt Wire and Representative Amy Peruso from that area. It was up at Waihawa Elementary School. And I gotta say, the public is pretty well educated on where the soft spots are on this proposed landfill above a high quality water resource. So I'm not sure if I have to do any more.
Quick footnote of last night, there were 30 people at a meeting at Sunset Beach Community Association that would like to have been at that meeting. And they got roped into a previous commitment. So
Yeah,
I don't know what the attendance was at last night's meeting, but there were 30 people who discussed that topic last night in a different forum also.
I would guess the elementary school cafeteria was completely full, maybe 150, 200 people there last night.
Everything is so bureaucratic, and you're sitting here waiting for them to tell us where to put the landfill. But you have such a network of all these things or places that you've studied. Is there any possibility that the Board of Water Supply can say, we would suggest this place, instead of waiting for them to tell you, you have to, this is the place that we want you to have, and you're resisting it? Can you make the suggestion as to where you think would be an ideal place for the landfill?
Well, thank you, Helen. You're maybe the fourth person, including a council member earlier this week, that asked basically that same question: can Board of Water Supply pick a site? Number one is the kuleana of the Board of Water Supply is to provide safe drinking water to the community. Our kuleana is water for the community to drink, to use, not to site landfills. And I'm not we want to be very clear, I'm not an expert on landfills and the issues related to even siting a landfill, what they require. But I think my simple answer is military land. They should look harder and put more pressure on the military to give up land. And we'll show a map later. The best areas for landfill, without picking a specific site, are in the coastal areas where there's a formed caprock formation along the coastlines. Not on the interior of the island where the volcanic aquifer basically has only soil above it and no kind of a barrier that would prevent or slow the transmittal leak contaminants down into the fresh water. And then along the coastal areas, the fresh water isn't as fresh. It's also probably more brackish and less easily usable for drinking water purposes. So I would suggest that. So I don't have an answer to a specific site. We have not done a siting study because then we get into E&V's responsibilities. And I know this is kind of it looks like a cop-out, but it is really the responsibility of the Department of Environmental Services to go through this process. They know clearly where the Board of Water Supply's position is. That's been the same position for over 40 years now. And that's defined in the pass, no pass area map around our island. And that was developed back in the 70s. Okay, so I can't say, I can't pick a particular site. I'm really traveling outside my expertise in Kuleana, but I would say let's look harder at the military.
Yeah, I don't mean to get on my soapbox, but I've been following this since
Yes.
98 when they first planned for the first expansion for Waimanalo Gulch. Unfortunately, what's happening now, I think the city is positioning, and this is my pessimism showing because I followed this for so damn long. And every time we've tried to come up with something, a new location or whatever, it's always ended up being Waimanalo Gulch. I think what they're positioning right now, and again, my pessimism is showing that they're going to have such a groundswell of people saying, not over an aquifer, let's expand Waimanalo Gulch. The original EIS was for 60.5 acres. When the 60.5 acres was full, they were supposed to find a new landfill site. If they had done that when they were supposed to in 1998, we would not be in this situation today because the additional federal restrictions, the Act 73, which says nothing closer than a half mile from residential, hospitals, schools, what have you, would not have been in effect. There would have been more opportunities. So once that went into effect with the current federal restrictions and other restrictions that we have, they have no other alternatives. Because I sat on the original Blue Ribbon panel and I sat on this latest landfill advisory committee and been there through the whole thing, and it's always this push and pull. But whenever we've come up with something, it always ends up, none of the sites are appropriate, let's expand Waimanalo Gulch. Let's keep it going, let's expand it even further beyond the original 60.5 acres. The total property is 200 acres. They're in about 90 to 120 acres now. They want to expand it out to almost the entire 200 acres except for what is required for a buffer from the surrounding properties. And personally, I think that's what they're doing, is they're lining up everything so that it'll push the 2028 closure date on Waimanalo Gulch back into the LUC to allow that to continue, in which case my community continues to get dumped on. In addition, because you were right, PVT is probably going to close in a few years, in which case that construction and demolition landfill has to go with the MSW landfill. So it doesn't matter. I got them all out there and have been fighting them for the last 20, 30 years. And it doesn't matter what the community does, what we've proposed. what we've encouraged while we still had opportunities prior to Act 73 going into effect, and now with Act 73, they've just slammed the door on all of us, everybody on this island. So I get it, I appreciate it, I'm watching from afar, everybody fighting for it, because at this point in time, I mean, I've been on record for however many years, but I really, my pessimism is showing, but I really think that the intent is, there ain't no other place, therefore just expand Waimanalo Gulch, because at least that one is below the pass, no pass line, and we don't have to worry about it.
Yes,
And
thank
I
you.
understand where you're talking about, Ernie, about the military lands, but I will tell you, the one that's probably the most promising is the one in my backyard, behind my house. So no, thank you very much. I don't want to see it behind my house.
Yeah, I wasn't actually thinking of the one behind your house, but someplace else. But I think what the points that Cynthia raised is very important. Since 2022, we've not been involved in any kind of discussions about siting of a proposed landfill. So the strategy, the approach is strictly being done within environmental services and the administration. So the other thing to remember, and I mentioned earlier here, 100% dependent on groundwater for its drinking water. Landfills, contaminants can enter drinking water, the groundwater, and leak out or spill out. And once landfills are constructed, they're there forever. They don't get removed and relocated elsewhere. Except I got to admit, there was, I think, after Iniki, the debris from Iniki went to Anahola and then was moved to Kekaha later for permanent storage. But they had to clean up Anahola and move it to the west side. And then, of course, I'm speaking to the choir here, that the preservation of our precious and pure groundwater resources are essential for our future. One thing that I heard last night, was that the life of the landfill is maybe around 20 years. By the time they actually fill it up, and maybe they'll extend it to 30 years. But it has definitely a life. So after this site is, if it's able to go through, despite my objections to it, 20 or 30 years from now, we're going to have the same conversation again. And then 20 or 30 years after that, another conversation. If all of these things end up over our groundwater resources, what will that mean for future generations when these things, and I don't think there's a way to absolutely guarantee it will not leak or spill out into the environment, the leachate. Waimanalo Gulch generates from data I saw, 3.6 million gallons of leachate a year to 5 million gallons of leachate a year. Waimanalo is a drier area than the proposed site up in Waihewa. We looked at rainfall data of the two areas. From 2019 data, it seems like the rainfall in the Waihewa area is maybe double the rainfall, nearly double the rainfall of what falls on the current location at Waimanalo Gulch and Ewa. So the amount of leachate generated is directly proportional to the amount of rainfall that falls on the landfill. Double the rainfall, potentially you could double as much, maybe double the amount of leachate, contaminated water that has to be dealt with. But the long-term question is really, how do we manage our opala on this island that is sustainable so that it is not a win for siting these landfills and a lose potentially for our water resources in the future, our freshwater resources? How do we find a way to handle our opala in a way that is sustainable? And again, I want to be very careful. I am not a solid waste expert. I'm just a water guy here. But I can see beyond my lifetime, there's going to be more of these discussions. And are these facilities end up placed over different parts of the freshwater aquifer on the interior part of the island. For the new people, new members, this is just a cross-section of the island. The light blue is the freshwater floating. This is water in the cracks and crevices of the porous volcanic rock. It doesn't exist in a large lake deep underground. It's in the volcanic rock, which acts like a porous sponge. That can also, seawater can seep through it. So as rain falls on our Mauka watershed areas, seeps down to volcanic rock, and because fresh water is lighter than salt water in density, it can float. And then the caprock that surrounds it, shown here in yellow, acts like a dam to hold back that fresh water from just flowing out and leaking out to the ocean. So it allows large amounts of fresh water to build up on the inside of the interior part of the island. It's over the caprock areas that we recommend landfills be sited. This is the total sustainable yield freshwater capacity estimated for the island, and we know that this number will probably go down. I think the commission is already looking at updated recharge information from the USGS, and that may cause some of these numbers actually to decrease because there are less rainfall. This is just on our initial research, different documents from the EPA and also the USGS, and basically it is really difficult or impossible to say, in my mind, to say that a landfill liner or containment system will be reliably keep contaminants within the landfill from leaking out into the environment or to the groundwater below for a long time or even for forever. So this is some of the challenges. And I mentioned about the leachate, 3.6 million gallons annually, up to 5 million at Waimanalo. This is just some of the data we got from the leachate, doing what they do in terms of chemical analysis of types of contaminants or materials or chemicals that they found in the leachate. This is water that's already seeped through the landfill, and they collect that water and they run tests. They pump that water out and take it to a wastewater treatment plant for disposal. Then on the right two columns, you'll have the Board of Water Supply, some of our wells, in terms of the same type of analytes or chemicals or substances and what we find in our drinking water. And this is actually looking at PFAS, what's being found in terms of PFAS. This is studies done in the US, but also in Europe and Asia too. These are the forever chemicals. These nanogram, Ng/L is nanograms per liter or parts per trillion. And this is looking at two types of PFASs, which are currently regulated by the EPA, and they've set a drinking water, quote unquote, standard for 4 parts per trillion for PFOA and PFOS. And this is the range of what was found in different places in their studies. This is actually local data. Back in November of 2024, Dr. Roger Brewer of the Department of Health did a field study of PFAS occurrences in Hawaii. He looked at 3 different major areas. Wastewater effluent, so water coming out of a wastewater treatment plant that's been treated. Also looked at the biosolids or the sludge that could be used on Oahu for fertilizer, soil supplements, and also looked at 5 landfills, including the Waimanalo Gulch landfill. This is data for the Waimanalo Gulch landfill of types of PFAS found and amounts. So the no-pass zone, that shaded in blue is the caprock area around the island. This map in blue is the pass zone, so areas that we feel we can support a landfill, municipal solid waste landfill, construction done and demolition waste landfill. But as you get into the gray area, which is uphill or Mauka of the caprock areas, the caprock is basically marine sediments and erosional deposits, less permeable. You get into the area where you have the volcanic freshwater aquifer that really doesn't have a lot of protection against contaminants. So we see in central Oahu from legacy pineapple sugar cultivation, the chemicals they use, the pesticides they use, eventually going through even like 800 feet of soil, being driven down toward the volcanic aquifer by rain. Every time it rains, that water helps move it further deeper. That we're still treating now 40 plus years now for removal of some of those agricultural chemicals from our drinking water. So the proposed landfill site is right there. It's actually on the interior part of the island. And this is actually from the USGS, I think it's called the Water Atlas of the United States, segment 13. The numbers are the estimated elevation above sea level of the top of the aquifer. So many feet above mean sea level. The arrows indicate in general what they think is the direction of flow in the underground aquifer. And you can see in that Waihawa area, what they call Schofield in this graphic, that's in the Waihawa area. There's something that is on the North Shore side, Haleiwa side, Wailua side, and on the Pearl Harbor side that helps to keep water from flowing to the ocean. And some people have called it like an underground or a submerged dam or something. But then water flows over the top of it or through it, and then flows toward Pearl Harbor, Waipahu area, or to the north toward Wailua, Haleiwa, Kawailo area. So those arrows indicate, and you can see right where it says 165 feet, right around that area is the proposed landfill site. And there happens to be a well that was drilled by Dole in the 1970s. And we looked at that data from that well. The water levels was about 169 feet above sea level when they encountered the top of the aquifer, the groundwater. So we suspect, we don't know for sure, but that there could be a potential because water moves from higher elevations to lower elevation. Water flows downhill. If there is leaks from this landfill through the containment system, the liner system, and it gets to the groundwater, it may flow toward the northwest, toward the Wailua, Haleiwa area, and start to impact the water resources there. And Board of Water Supply, right now we have two well stations, our Wailua wells and our Haleiwa wells there, that help supply the North Shore community. And the users, and no pass zone, no pass zone is a guidelines. It's in our rules, section 3-301. Like I said, the waste disposal systems that we have to look at and need the approval of the manager include landfills, sanitary landfills. And this is kind of the procedures that I talked about earlier. So again, we are 100% on groundwater for our source of drinking water, for domestic use, for agriculture. Landfills contain contaminants that can enter groundwater. And they're permanent facilities. Once you build them and you fill them up, they're there forever. And the requirement under federal and state regulations is after you filled it up and closed it, and Cynthia, I think you're far more the expert on landfills than I, but I think they have to maintain it, the leachate collection system and the cap on the landfill for only 30 years. So what happens after 30 years? At 50 years, 60, 100 years, who's watching this landfill? Who's making sure that it isn't leaking into the environment? They are required to drill monitor wells that monitor the groundwater below and nearby the landfill, actually below the liner and outside the liner system. But what happens, who's gonna be watching that? And if there is a leak, leachate is leaking out and contaminating the groundwater, who's responsible to take care of the problem? Ultimately, if Board of Water Supply, if the chemicals, and you saw that long list of chemicals, if depending on what we encounter, if we can actually treat it practically, then we'll treat it, but then who bears the cost? That cost is going to go on the Board of Water Supply customers to deal with that. And that's the example we have right now with 12 activated carbon facilities or GAC facilities in Central Oahu, BWS and its customers is paying for that cost of treatment.
The city and county of Honolulu does not maintain their landfills. We have an example within my district where one was closed in 1989. You're supposed to put 2 feet of soil on top, a geotextile liner, more soil on top, irrigate, seed, and maintain. Never happened.
Yeah, so that is a concern. And again, I kind of bring back to the idea these things have a life before they get filled up, and they have to find another one. So they'll start to proliferate. So the issue is, comes back to how do we deal with our Opala? How do we reduce, reuse, recycle to reduce the amount? How do we deal with it so that it is not a win-lose between handling Opala and having our drinking water resources available for us? Prevention is better than reacting. So I know I've had comments and I've had pushback from the administration about connecting Red Hill with this. But I understand fully, and it's obvious that Red Hill deals with fuel storage, massive underground storage tanks built in 1940s, early 1940s, that store, and right above our aquifer in that area of Red Hill, Halava. I understand that's a difference between this. This is a landfill is Opala and garbage. But I use it as an analogy of decisions made over 80 years ago to place a facility that contained large amounts of substances that could contaminate our freshwater resources. And then seeing the results of that, maybe not 10 years or 5 years later, but 80 years or longer down the road. So likewise, as we site these landfills, if we decide if they're successful in putting it above our water resources, this is like where Red Hill was in the late 1930s and 1940s. So the issue is, I think we need to consider these questions or decisions in a long term, for a long term. So that's it. Any other questions or comments? Anybody?
Magic Island was a landfill, and a lot of people seem to enjoy it, and maybe it's doing horrible things, but seems like there's some pluses associated with it. Same with the waterfront park as you get closer to Honolulu Harbor.
Kaka'ako.
And Kauailoa has a landfill that they filled for years and years. They actually put that landfill in a wetland. Okay, so things change for the better. In other countries, they take, our airport runway is a landfill. I mean, it's coral, it's been dredged, but in a way it's a landfill. Is there a way to compact this stuff to high density and shape it in such a format that it could be used in constructive sorts of ways other than the way it's just sort of just being tossed to the side? In the past, it seems like some positive things have happened. And I'm sure there's a lot of laws against it now, but laws can change too. Anyway, just food for thought.
Thank you, Bob. I don't know the answer to your question.
One thing is absolutely for sure. I really appreciate Cynthia's pessimism. That's born out of our age, how long we've been looking at these issues. But what's really important is that this discussion, all of the vocabulary related to it, needs to be brought forward. So the Board of Water Supply taking a very, very hard stance is critical, but it needs to be presented as you have, in the context of living on an island. And so bringing this discussion forward, I'm thinking as you're talking, we really need a good video production of what you have said, using the language that has been presented, and keeping this issue on the front burner. That's our challenge. An elected official is trying to get to the next election, and then beyond that, that's understandable. But we can't let this kind of a discussion go to sleep ever. In our neighborhood board meeting, one of my fellow board members, Rocky Kaloiva, said, "You know what? It's time for every ahupua'a to figure out its trash problem." And I thinking about that. How many of us, just a quick raise of hands, how many of you buy eggs at Costco?
When they have eggs available.
Yeah, when they have eggs, And of course, they come in a plastic container. And then what do you do with the plastic container? Well, you can do all kinds of little things. You can start some seedlings in it. You can, I don't know, raise your own chickens and use those. But if you go to Times to buy eggs, they come in a cardboard container or some paper-based container, right? We have to look at the trash problem. We can't, I mean, I appreciate Ernie saying, this is what the Board of Water Supply's responsibility is to, is water, but protecting that water means we have to look at the trash issue. And so we have to keep that front and center at the city council level, in the legislature this year, and every year. So I just wanted to express that. That's me being optimistic that we actually will wade into those kinds of issues. But human beings have an incredible capacity to go to sleep. We can't let that happen.
Yeah, thank you, John. You can go to boardofwatersupply.com, and on the very front page, you'll see a proposed landfill or new landfill. And then click on that, and we'll put our latest information that we have. And also link back to E&V's webpage, where they have even more information. I mentioned at the City Council Committee hearing earlier this week that, this is a problem, but also this is an opportunity. I think it's got everybody's attention, an opportunity to have that very conversation that you're suggesting, John, because we have to think about it that we are an island community. We are in the same canoe, and how do we survive in that canoe and be able to sustain it and deal with the external impacts of climate change that may have on us, and also how do we live our lives in a way that is really truly sustainable.
Anytime I've been on a plane, not as often as I'd like to be, to go somewhere else and go see how they do things, but sea level rise is going to mean that the whole runway at the airport has to come up higher, doesn't it? So maybe that's where Bob's idea comes in, right? Yeah. Let's start planning for that. We go back and we look at things that already exist, the built environment, and re-examine them for what they can be turned into.
Yeah, excellent suggestion. Thank you. Anybody else? Helen?
As I see it, we either have the military let us have some of the land, to have this landfill, or have we thought about, are there little islands around us that are uninhabited, and have the landfill there, and use Genki balls to throw in the landfill so that the water is purified. I don't know if they've even thought about, aren't there little volcano islands that are being built all the time over at on the Big Island or something like that?
There's one that is still underwater that at some point will become its own island. Yeah, Loihi?
Yeah, we don't have to have it on Oahu if it's, 10, 20 miles away. I mean, we were exporting our garbage. Weren't we doing that at one time? I think we were.
I'm not sure. They have issued a RFI, a request, I think, for interest or information on the idea of shipping our garbage elsewhere. I don't know if they've had any responses.
Go where there are no people.
That was proposed in the past. They tried to do that. They ended up packaging it all up in bales and putting it in the harbors, and then we got stopped because where it was supposed to go in Washington State was on Native American lands, which raised its ugly head because now you have one Native people sending trash to another Native people, and that was not flying. So by the time that whole thing kind of fell apart, they had to take all of those bales and either put them in Waimanalo Gulch or feed them into H-Power. So that, they tried,
Yeah,
But
but
it never came to fruition that they sent anything off island.
no, we should re-explore that.
It's expensive.
Yeah, thank you. Guy?
You know, with all respect to Cynthia and everyone's opinion, but I think maybe we should step back one step further and, you know, I think everybody's home has a blue and a green can, but I've been to Japan recently, and if you go there, there's about 5 containers. It's like burnable, paper, I can't remember all the different categories, but you know, their recycling seems to be advanced, where we're kind of in the blue and green stage. And so to expound on John's idea, you know, that we need to do more, and it probably needs to start with our, you know, looking at ourselves and saying, you know, this is burnable, this is not, this is recyclable, so on and so forth. And I think, you know, then maybe the end product or the end result of having a landfill could fit in a smaller footprint because we'd produce less waste. But I mean, I'm no expert either, so.
No, that's a good suggestion. My daughter just graduated from a college in Seattle, and we went up there, and I noticed, you know, our gray bin is really big. It's the biggest of the gray, green, or blue, yeah? The gray is the biggest. Up there the gray was the smallest, and the recycle bins were bigger. So it kind of trains us to produce less Opala. They can't be recycled or reused. Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for the information. Thank you for the input, the questions, comments, all very helpful. Now on to something a little lighter, climate change. If you'll remember back in July, I did a presentation on kind of an overview of the Water Master Plan that the board adopted in 2016, and then we walked through the scope, you know, the major elements that are going to be done in this Water Master Plan update. And so this is that list of scope items, and wanted to focus in today on the one that's in green, climate resilience planning. And to take us through that conversation, I missed a slide somewhere. But anyway, I wanted to introduce you to Sebastian Malter. Sebastian's a climate change expert with CDM Smith, and his work is really focused on taking climate science and making it actionable in plans, in programs, things like that. So
I'm Sebastian. I'm part of CDM Smith. I'm from the East Coast in Philadelphia, and I just wanted to mention that I really appreciate this really warm and nice weather here in Hawaii, because last week I was still shoveling snow, and when I go back tomorrow, we have another snowstorm coming, so we'll be doing the same thing again. And I'm also very appreciative and grateful of the opportunity to work on this project, to apply the expertise we have with integrating climate science into water master planning, because it's a really, really important topic. What you can see here is just the number of different initiatives which are going on here on the island, from community climate preparedness, climate action, vulnerability assessments of infrastructure, and BWS also a few years back has performed a climate risk assessment to all their infrastructure, but that risk assessment was mainly focusing on current risks of natural hazards and malevolent acts. So which essentially is man-made acts or hazards. So really looking more at what's now, what are the problems now, what are the risks now. But the master plan update really provides an opportunity to integrate climate change into this and look more into the long term, more into the future, to make sure infrastructure built, upgraded, or retrofitted now will last under these changing climate conditions. But altogether, I think the master plan update with that opportunity of integrating climate change is a really fits really well with into the overall efforts which are going on on the island. It's complementary, and I think there are also a lot of opportunities for synergies as well. That all these initiatives are happening is very important because and the presentation today will focus mostly on the master plan, of course. Now, that this is all these initiatives are very important because all of us have been seeing in the news, natural disaster after natural disaster across the nation. This is just one slide of one example of all the national disasters which caused damages more than $1 billion in 2023. And it ranges from hurricanes, storms, wildfires, flooding, heat waves, the full range of things. And if you think about it in the context of Hawaii, Hawaii is very unique, given its location, the topography, geography. Those are a threat to the island as well. We have extreme heat, we have flooding, droughts, hurricanes, wildfires, etc. What I would like to do now is just to step a little bit back and give some room for conversation. And I want to ask you the question of, when you think about climate change, what are you most concerned about? What could be anything what I just mentioned and was showing on the slide, but also essentially what keeps you up at night, right?
The CO2 metrics keep climbing, and it's known to harbor more heat in the atmosphere. So that's just one metric that's real easy to keep track of.
Ryan?
For me, I think about the costs of things like the wildfires, things such as heavy rains, because these costs just keep building every time we have more natural disasters, and that cost gets passed on to all of us that live in the islands because insurances go up. I think we all learned that by now. And so for folks like, I have a son, and when I think about my son, I think about how is he going to stay here with the given cost of prices just go up, and the more natural disasters. I don't think things like the Maui wildfire will be the last of them. I'm knock on wood, but not to be pessimistic either, but it's just, I don't think that's the last in my own lifetime that I might see.
My experience, it seems like the climate change is bringing about these the effects on our infrastructure with the increased frequency, and also the magnitude of these effects are growing as well. So, we keep trying to harden grids and infrastructure to a certain level, and then we have to watch all these external factors in which we actually don't have a lot of in-house expertise. So we have to go out and learn or get this expertise to help us combat on what is the next thing that, we're going to have to go so far. Like our company is focusing on the wildfire, so. Yeah.
But as the temperature goes up, the mosquitoes go up, and more birds are becoming affected and dying, native birds. And it has a disastrous effect on a lot of corals. I understand the Great Barrier Reef has taken a huge hit because of not very much of a temperature change. So it's all connected in so many ways. Just keep the ocean alive.
Yep. Our health, human health is already being subjected to all of the impacts of climate change. That's only going to increase.
Most concerned about changing behavior. I think throwing more information to us is not the answer. We know how serious it is mentally, but it doesn't translate into change of behavior. So the question that needs to be asked is, okay, this is serious. Do we all agree that it's really serious? So you give us more and more information. All it does is scare us, but there's no translation in any change in our behavior. And I see this all over. They don't change. They're not picking up rubbish. They're not, and I'm to blame too. Tomorrow is good enough. Somehow, the public needs to be examined, psychoanalyzed, to make us change behavior. That's what needs to be done, not giving us more information.
So what I'm hearing is all valid concerns, of course. A lot of it has to do with infrastructure. I'm hearing structural systems, infrastructure, humans, human health, natural systems, ecosystems, right? Non-structural systems. So using that concept, or keep that concept in mind, looking at structural impacts, non-structural impacts in humans, you can apply that concept and that thinking also in the context of a water utility. And what we typically do is when we look at how climate change does impact utilities, we do look at this. We look at structural, we look at non-structural, and we look at human health impacts. Just zooming in now more into a water utility context. So here's an example, typical impacts you see due to climate stressors. Let's pick drought, right? Drought means less rainfall, less recharge, less water availability, which puts stress on water systems, water restrictions. Similar extreme heat makes us more thirsty, makes vegetation more thirsty. You need more water. It means more demand, which on the other hand also can stress your supply system, right? Now, when it comes to structural systems such as pump stations, wells, treatment plants, it's similar, right? You have extreme storms, there are damages you may have to expect, service interruptions, equipment failure, coastal flooding, there's salinity, corrosion to pipelines, etc. Workers who are out in the field repairing water main breaks, doing sampling, etc., they are exposed more and more to these increasing frequency of extreme heat events or other hazardous conditions, making working conditions unsafe. There is the health impact, of course, but these types of events also affect labor productivity because you have to take more breaks if you're warm, right? Or overtime is required, etc. So this is just an example how all these different stressors, be it heat, sea level rise, flooding, storms, really does affect the water system in many, many ways. As a result, when we do these types of assessments and when we look at climate change and the water utility, you really have to have a more holistic, comprehensive approach to this, not just looking at flooding as that one hazard, which always comes up, but there are many others which do affect your water system in many, many other ways. And the idea with the Water Master Plan update is to use the science and incorporate it into all aspects of water utility planning from source to tap. With the climate resilience planning task, which is part of the master plan, the idea is really to take a deep dive into the science, understand what is the magnitude, what is the severity and the frequency of different hazards occurring in the future, and identify the impacts those can have to BWS. So we'll be looking at different hazards and different stressors, different impacts, and as a result, identify those supply vulnerabilities and ultimately develop measures and strategies how you can reduce that risk. And those measures will then be incorporated into the capital improvement plan. When we do climate change evaluations, we rely on climate science. And what are the scientific tools which can actually help us to understand future climate models. Climate models are, in very simple terms, just computer models, which in these computer models, our planet is represented in a lot of little boxes, millions of boxes representing the ocean, the atmosphere, the land surface, and then climate scientists model all the different atmospheric processes, physical processes like cloud formation, rainfall. What goes into these models are emission scenarios. Emission scenarios drive those climate models. So emission scenarios are essentially future trajectories of socioeconomic conditions in the future. You may have heard of RCP 8.5 or RCP 4.5. The red line essentially means, which you can see in that spaghetti graph, it's high emissions, continued use of fossil fuels, keep drilling, and then towards the end of the century, it slows down a little. Then we have moderate emission scenarios, like the yellow one, which shows, okay, emissions will go down in the second half of the century. So by using these scenarios and plugging them into these models to drive these models, we can use the models to understand how the Earth's climate system will respond to these emissions. And what we get out of it are climate projections of temperature, of rainfall, and several other climate variables. Now, this is a very specialized field. There are maybe 30, or probably even more now, research groups who have the resources and capacity to run these models. And they do it on a global scale. Now, there's another group of scientists who take that information and make it relevant for a specific region or a locality. And there's a statistical process involved in this. It's called downscaling, where you use that information from the global models and bring it down to the local scale to understand how climate, temperature, and rainfall may actually change at a local scale, like here on Hawaii, for example. But then, the nice thing is, the scientists who do that, they make the data available to the public. You can go on a website, you can click on your location of interest, and then you can download some data. But what do you do with it? How do we use that information for a water master plan or for infrastructure design? And that's often not that straightforward. And that's essentially where we will come in as, I call it just climate practitioners, where we are using techniques and tools and processes to identify how to use the information. But how we use it also depends on the end user. Who is the end user of the information, right? Are we doing risk assessments? Are we doing design? Are we doing some hydrologic modeling? Each end user has its own unique requirements, so that there is some effort involved in taking the information, how it's coming to us, and then tailoring it to the end user requirements. Here for Hawaii, there are some great resources available. Actually, this morning we just talked to Chip Fletcher, who's doing a really amazing work in this field, and as part of the project, we'll be using and leveraging that information. And here's just one example. You can go on the Hawaii Climate Data Portal and pull these projections. So here's an example of rainfall. So on the left side, you can see the spatial rainfall distribution as of today, representing present conditions. And then here an example how that may change under a higher emission scenario, that red line we looked at earlier, towards the end of the century. You probably won't see these numbers, but the redder the color, the drier it gets. So this is, this particular model is projecting a much drier future. The same you can do with temperature. Again, on the left side, average temperatures as of today, and then on the right side, the same idea, higher emissions, temperatures, land surface temperatures going up, about 3.5 degrees Celsius, and that's a pretty uniform distribution across the island. Now, I'm showing you the worst case scenario, but there are, as I said earlier, different scenarios you can look at as well. Sea level rise. UH also has this really wonderful tool, the SOE-ST Climate Viewer, where you can look at different flood elevations and how it will impact the island. And this tool uses the latest NOAA sea level rise projections. There's a wide range of potential futures. And when I talk to people about sea level rise, I often hear them saying, there's a lot of focus on the future. Of course, the future is important, but the fact is sea levels have been going up already. What do you think? How much has sea levels already risen here along the coastline in Hawaii over the last 100 years? It's half a foot over the last 100 years. Okay. And as you can see, it's been pretty linear. Reasons are land subsidence, already thermal expansion. So the excess heat we see due to warming, 90% of that heat is absorbed by the ocean. Materials which get warmer expand, thus sea levels are going up. And then we have been actually seeing some acceleration over the last maybe decade or two, which means there are other things at play, and those things are largely related to the melting of ice sheets. We know sea level is going up. It has been for the last 100 years. Now, the question is really, as we go more into the future, how much and how fast? And that is an important question because, not so fun fact, but about 170,000 years ago, we had carbon dioxide emissions, concentrations similar to today, temperatures similar to today, but sea levels, we could make another quiz out of it, but sea levels were about 20 feet higher than today. So what that means, even if we stop emissions today, right now, sea levels would still be going up for centuries. What we will be seeing in terms of severity and acceleration essentially depends on the melting of the ice sheets, the Antarctica and Greenland ice sheets. So if you are in the news or listening to the news and they're saying scientists believe ice sheets are much more stable than previously thought, so that's good news. You're probably going to be tracking on that, maybe on that red line. But if they are saying bad news, we are under predicting, then you're probably more on that orange line. Some uncertainty, but that's just as context, the type of information we are dealing with and will be using as part of the master plan update. All right, so how are we actually now going to do it? How do we getting climate science into the master plan? We'll have, 4 very simple steps. As usual, starting with some data collection. There has been already a lot of work been done on the island or is ongoing. USGS was very active. They have been doing groundwater modeling. They have been looking at future rainfall changes and have run groundwater model for the islands. There are the projections I was just showing earlier, and additional studies which have information we can leverage in our work. And then, wanted to go back. And then the other part is identifying, okay, what are now the actual climate stressors we should be considering and which are relevant to the Water Master Plan update. And then based on that, we'll take a deep dive, do the technical analyses, and the result of that will then inform mitigation strategies. So here's a list of climate stressors we are considering. We group them in chronic and acute. So acute are event-driven, like a hurricane or a heat wave, a wildfire. And then chronic is more those long-term gradual changes. And the reason we are doing this is because when it comes to the analyses, each hazard or each type of hazard has needs a different tool or a different process, but also solutions and strategies will be different. You remember we talked about non-structural and structural systems earlier, so we'll be looking at, okay, how are all these hazards or climate stressors affect demand source, water resources, which is more the non-structural stuff, and then infrastructure. There will be a list of impacts, which some of them you can see here, and the idea is in the analyses and during the planning process to really look at each of those different impacts in more detail. So for example, higher temperatures, less rainfall, we are more thirsty, plants are more thirsty, demand will go up, but the question is by how much? So source analysis. I think I mentioned that earlier. Reduced rainfall, higher temperatures, more evaporation affects recharge, groundwater recharge, and that will affect water, our yield, right, our supply, and water quality to some degree as well. So the question is, how will it actually now affect these resources? Build a statistical model which essentially uses temperature, rainfall, demand, and establishes a relationship with these three to reproduce groundwater levels. And the idea is we can then use that relationship and change the temperature and rainfall inputs so that they are representative of climate, of a future climate using these climate projections, and then run the model and see how groundwater levels may change based on those different climate conditions. And the idea is also to leverage the existing studies because having those two pathways of analyses makes the result more robust and defensible. And then the idea is then to really identify those supply vulnerabilities and which ultimately will inform management strategies. These can be structural or operational. So that's to be determined based on the results we get. In terms of water demand, as I mentioned, higher temperatures, less rainfall drive demand. And how do we capture these increases due to climate change? And here we're planning to leverage BWS's existing water demand model. That's a model which was developed by Bill Fernandez, a colleague of mine, during the previous plan development. And it uses climatic and non-climatic variables to predict water demand. And here you can see the 8 variables which essentially showed the strongest correlation with demand, such as local economy, average price of water, plumbing efficiency, etc. We also looked at some other variables as well, such as visitation of the island, what are some of the others, water main breaks, etc. But based on the model and the analyses, the ones you see here showed the strongest correlation with water demand. And to express this maybe in more statistical terms, so 90% of the variability or the pattern you can see on this graph can be explained by these 8 variables. Now, as you can see, there's temperature and rainfall as part of the equation. So what we can do now is adjusting those values. So we can say, okay, monthly precipitation in 20, 30 years from now will go down. Temperatures will go up. And then we can rerun this model and see how much more demand we'll actually need just because of climate change. And this is just an example from another project where we are looking at the black line is the current demand, and then the blue line are the demand projections without climate change. So they're all the same, 2050, 2070. What if the future is really hot and really a lot of rain? What if the future is hot but almost no rain, or a lot of decrease in rainfall? And what we found in this example is demand in the worst case could actually go up by 20% just because of climate change and the increased consumption of water. These were just 2 examples, but that's kind of the type of process we'll be doing and undergoing, looking at really source to tap infrastructure, water quality, water quantity, and looking at a range of hazards, because each hazard needs a different tool to evaluate, to quantify. Depends on end user requirements. I said that earlier. And then climate change does influence infrastructure investments. So, we want to make sure resilience measures are accounted for in the capital improvement plan. Especially important for water infrastructure, because what you build will be there for many, many years. So you want to make sure it's resilient to changing conditions and robust under a range of futures. And it's not just infrastructure, it also provides a good opportunity to see what can be done in terms of operational improvements as well. And that concludes my presentation, and we'll be happy to answer any questions.
Should the water resources be the metric that's used, some metric in there to set the zoning on these islands? I mean, what comes first, somebody's credit card or their house or the roof or the water? I mean, it's all important, but in the end, you're going to have you're going to have limited factors, and clearly water could be one of them. Maybe it should be factored in very heavily on the front end and be looking at its potential long-term availability rather than create a giant problem with bad zoning early on. That's all.
During COVID, we became aware that places like New Zealand, the ratio between residents and tourists was like 1 to 4. In Hawaii, it's 1 to 11. Got to rethink the tourist industry.
Yeah.
Yeah, that issue, this question that Bob, you raised comes up multiple times when we meet with people in communities, and I'll just be very honest. I don't have a good answer for that yet. But at some point, I think there were attempts in the past done. I remember a 2050 plan or something, trying to look at what can our community sustain, what can our resources to maintain a certain level of quality of life.
It intersects with how much trash we generate too.
We can add Opala, yeah.
I think I shared with this group before that I came across a few years ago a 50-year plan that was done by the board in, I think, 1970. And it looked ahead to, the 50-year projection, so essentially currently, and it was projecting that the population of Oahu would be in excess of 2 million people, and that the water supply would be from nuclear-powered seawater desalination. So we're not in that place.
A little bit riffing off Helen's comment about, don't give us more information, do things that'll make us change behavior. I'm not sure I entirely agree with that, but I think it's about giving information that does change behavior, or giving information sometimes changing the public's behavior is a huge challenge, right? But it's giving information to decision makers or to back them up on the decisions a lot of them want to make. And so it's sort of a general comment, but when I was looking at your slide, it came to me because, well, I really appreciated your slide. It was hard for me to follow those two. And one was a rainfall slide, and you gave the current rainfall levels on Oahu in inches, and then next to it would be the percentage reduction in the worst case scenario. And so I'm sitting there trying to do the math in my head and losing track of your presentation. So a suggestion there, and it's related to giving, whether it's me as a member of the public, but more importantly, a decision maker who's facing decisions about where to put a landfill. And then the very next slide was temperature and sort of current temperatures, and Oahu is mostly yellow, and then the change in the worst case scenario was just this big orange or almost red blob in Celsius. So again, it was difficult for me. I'm sitting there doing the math in my head. I don't remember. So I don't mean it as a critique, but I mean it as a suggestion, not just for you as you continue to do presentations like this. And I know you got lots of experience in it, but also as we think about it, and BWS does a great job of this, how do we convey information, not just to the public, but particularly to decision makers who their minds are so full, but what do we do to back them up to make the decisions that they need to do, not just with information, but with, I'm going to say this in the wrong way, the apparent strong support of their constituencies and communities. So a little bit of a monologue, and I'll get off my soapbox. Cynthia.
No, I appreciate that comment.
Thank you.
Yep.
I almost felt like you were trying to get across a point rather than provide information, which makes me take in less of what you were saying.
To that point, it is incredibly important to think very carefully how you present information and how you talk about it, right? And I appreciate that comment because it shows that, well, maybe there's a better way to do that. Or my intent was to show, hey, we are having this information here for the island, and we want to use it and leverage it, right? And just giving 2 examples of it. That was the main objective of that slide.
Question I'd have for you, Sebastian, in looking at this slide that's up right now. You talked about how to integrate climate change into the Water Master Plan. And that second bullet is about climate change driving capital projects and costs. And I presume the presumption is driving costs up. Are there also opportunities that come out of this analysis that don't necessarily result in increased costs? And if so, what does that look like?
You would think that climate change or adding it, foot of freeboard or whatever, will make projects more expensive, right? Which is true in many cases. But what would be the cost if you don't do anything? What is the cost of damage, right? The cost of action versus no action. And there, adding climate change to it always wins if you do the math.
Can we also look at making a smarter decision in consideration of a different climate future?
Don't plan for the worst case scenario, which is 100 years away, right? Do it incrementally, step by step. Set the foundation now so you can adjust as you go. But every maybe 10 or 20 years, reevaluate and see if you have to increase your level of resilience and adding on top of it. And that adaptive planning and this adaptive management is something, is a principle we'll be following as we implement this plan or update the plan.
Yeah, sorry, because don't you, if you're putting in new infrastructure, don't you want to make sure you're putting it in for the life of the infrastructure, not just for what your 10 or 20-year planning horizon is?
Yes, so when we do look at climate resilience and infrastructure, we look at the lifetime of the asset. But if it, a classical example is you have a pump station and you want to protect it. One idea is we can build a flood wall around it, but how high should be the flood wall? So if you build that flood wall, the foundation of the flood wall in a way that it can accommodate, if you can add to it later on, that is kind of that adaptive element to it, right? You still protect the asset over the lifetime, but you do it incrementally based on how your conditions change. Does that make sense? Or the other example is there are these floating fire stations in San Francisco. They're adaptive already now as they just go with the water. As water goes up, they keep floating up, which is kind of the extreme adaptive, I guess.
Your pronouns sound very humanistic, and yet your projections are out in 2050, 2070, maybe 50 years out. How much AI is going to be involved versus human brains?
But what I'm seeing from kind of just the state of research is that a lot of these modeling applications are based on physical principles and physical laws. There are tendency of AI, especially Google, some of those technology firms, trying to build these supermodels which can simulate climate. But what they are lacking is that scientific or engineering judgment, which you need to interpret the results. So I don't know, at least in the midterm, I would say AI might be a supplemental tool, but not replace, the model.
Do you see, right now in 2023, we saw Lahaina burn to the ground. And now we're seeing California and Los Angeles being threatened and by wildland fires. With what you think climate change could bring, what other types of disasters or threats that we're not even thinking about could be in the range of realm of possibility in the near future, midterm, long term?
I could also see maybe more landslides as we have those really intense rainfall events. Warmer atmosphere can hold more moisture. It can hold it longer, so it will be more drought conditions. But once the water comes out, it's just, dumping. Yeah. So biological threats, as we become even more tropical, warmer temperatures, our forests change. Are we going to see different kinds of pests or invasives that actually now take hold that we have to deal with? Yeah, that's a good point.
That are something that we're not on our horizon right now. But if we look at areas of the world, especially in the Pacific, that is actually warmer or hotter and more rainfall than we are, what are their challenges, and could some of those actually now migrate over to Hawaii as our climate actually becomes more consistent to those areas? So how do we do this by being more forward-looking, so not just reacting?
Animal disease, and I think we can expect a lot more of that and planning ahead for that as well.
A matter of business. You all got a copy of the notes from our last meeting. I know you, as always, diligently read them. Any comments, questions, corrections in those? All right, we will consider those accepted and move on to our final topic, which is updates on Red Hill.
And it's been, I think, very obvious, the relationship between the Board of Water Supply and the military. I would characterize it as right now kind of strained. They actively, are actually trying to attack us publicly. We are, standing our ground, but it is a strange relationship. So it is going to be very important to see what kind of leadership takes hold under the new administration, and then also their attitudes toward the issue of Red Hill, the presence of the military in Hawaii, and how the land leases turn out or don't turn out there. This is a very I think we're taking more of the wait and see approach right now. The current leadership is probably going to be gone in a year or 2 years. We'll be dealing with a new batch of officers coming in. Of course, all the way up the chain of command back to the Pentagon. So other than that, not a whole lot on Red Hill, except that, you know, whenever I connect Red Hill and the landfill, I think the military probably don't really like that. Thank you.
With that, wanted to put up in front the meeting dates for the rest of 2025. So April 17th, July 17th, October 16th, all on Thursdays. Looking forward to seeing you all, to your comments and questions and participation and input.